The First Punic War was the longest war Rome had ever fought. What lasted from 264 to 241 BC will fundamentally change the way Rome operates. They will no longer be confined to the Italian peninsula, but will turn their gaze to the Mediterranean Sea. In the year 264, Rome controls an area of around 50,000 square miles. Their entire population, around 3 million. The area around the city of Rome probably comprised of about 1 million. What you see now is the adult male citizens recorded in the census in the 3rd century. And as you can see by 264, the male citizens ranked 292,234. Now I'm going to give you a brief overview of how Rome and Carthage operated. The Roman Republic operated on a complex system of alliances within their territory, and all of these cities within Rome's control operated more or less as an independent entity. Their main obligation was to supply troops for Rome. When it comes to Carthage, we have no written documents aside from a few inscriptions from Carthage itself, and so we have to rely on outside authors such as Aristotle and Polybius for our information. So let's jump right into it. Troop organization. We do not know how Rome's allies were armed and organized. We do know that in the Second Punic War they were organized into cohorts and were virtually indistinguishable from Roman troops. Legions consisted of more or less 4,200 Roman infantry and 300 cavalry, plus Latin and Italian allied troops up to double the amount. The consuls commanded 2 legions each, and during the First Punic War, from 261 to 249, these consular armies were levied yearly. We know that during the First Punic War, the scutum, the shield that we normally see with Roman soldiers, was in use. The gladius and the pilum, or the javelin, may have actually been adopted during this very war, when Rome first encountered Spanish mercenaries fighting for Carthage. However, it is hard to believe that Roman troops were using different weaponry, and that they had to be trained to fight in a new style during wartime, because our first reference of the pilum, for example, is by Polybius referring to 251, so rather, it is believed that they used similar weaponry, and the Spanish mercenaries just had better versions of it. Rome's forces were divided into 4 groups: the Astati, the Principes, the Triarii, and Velites, or skirmishers. Command was given to the annually elected consuls, although there are some exceptions as we will see, and during this war, it will not be uncommon to see the same man elected more than once. Now, Rome favored a strict rotation of office, meaning that imperium or military authority was never renewed or granted after the term of consulship was over, and as a result of this, Rome seriously deprived itself of experienced commanders. For instance, Gaius Duilius, the man who won the first naval victory in Roman history, was never used again despite being alive all throughout the war. It must be noted that the dates for the consulship will be given in years such as 264/263, and that is because at this time, those entering the consulship did not enter on January 1st, but rather on sporadic dates such as December or May, etc. Now, Carthage, on the other hand, operated in a similar way to the Romans. They were both considered by the Greeks to have mixed constitutions, but in practice were essentially oligarchic. Their population was probably around the same as Rome's, if not larger. The Carthaginians had 2 consuls like the Romans. Their official names were called suffetes, which probably means judge, which implies they had a judicial role, and Carthage most likely had a popular assembly as well. There is one key difference between that of the Carthaginian consul and the Roman consul, and that is that the Carthaginian consul did not hold military authority. There was also a state treasurer and a moral censor, and presumably other officials. These suffetes would preside over the Carthaginian Senate, or another term for them, the Council of Elders, and it apparently had several hundred members who probably held office for life, but how they were appointed is uncertain. Within this Council of Elders, or the Senate, there was a smaller body of 30 counselors who seemed to have been a higher tier of senators. They might have had a lot more influence in deciding policy. In addition to this, there was a body of 104 judges, often referred to as the 100, who were chosen by groups of 5 officials, but how is unclear. It is also not clear what the relationship was between the 100 and the Senate, but they might have acted as proconsuls or former senators. All in all, the people of Carthage probably had less say in the government than the people of Rome. However, Polybius believed that the situation had changed by the time of the Second Punic War. Military authority was given to men appointed specifically for the purpose. They might have actually been elected by the popular assembly. There was apparently no limit to the length of time a general might serve, and this had the advantage that many Carthaginian commanders became highly professional. There was a downside to this though. Since Carthage treated these men and their armies like employees who had a job to do, there was a tendency to leave them to their own devices and not be as supportive as they should have been. For instance, Hannibal Barca during the Second Punic War was only once given reinforcements from Carthage, despite how crucial his campaign was to the war effort. Another example, and we shall see more of this, is Hannibal's father, Hamilcar, in the First Punic War, who from 247 on to the end of the war was left to struggle in Sicily on his own when a concerted effort from Carthage might have won them the war against Rome. The Carthaginian Empire controlled the northern coast of Africa from Cyrenaica to the Atlantic through colonies and by taking other colonies under their protection like Utica and Agrigentum. They had some colonies in Spain and the Balearic Islands. They also controlled Sardinia and Corsica. In Sicily, they had controlled most of western Sicily by the start of the war. Carthage dealt with her subjects in different ways. Carthaginian citizens did not have to serve in the military overseas by the start of the war, unlike the Romans, and the Carthaginian Empire was not homogeneous and consisted of different groups with different legal statuses. Next to the Roman citizen were the Libby Phoenicians, who shared an equal status under the law, most likely because their cities were once Carthaginian colonies or Phoenician in origin. There were numerous other subjects, but they were treated differently depending on certain factors, such as whether it was a city, town, or tribe, and their relationship to the city of Carthage. All of these groups had different obligations and duties. However, it should be noted that Carthage showed no attempts to grant citizenship to their subjects or extend similar rights. Their troop organization consisted of Balearic slingers, Numidian cavalry, and their infantry were most likely styled after the Greek hoplite. Not the Macedonian hoplite wielding the sarissa, but the Greek hoplite wielding the short thrusting spear. The Spanish wielded their short swords, the Celts fought with their long swords and most likely fought naked or wore pants and cloaks. The elephants was probably first used at Agrigentum in 262, and were used in large numbers throughout the war, as we shall see. Carthage relied mainly on mercenaries and conscripts for their armies, as well as veterans from Greece. The main battleships of the war was the quinquereme. There also consisted smaller and larger vessels like the trireme and the hexares and heptares. Their names represent the number of file of rowers from bow to stern on each side of the ship. The hexares mean 6-fitted, and the heptares mean 7-fitted. The quinquereme consisted of about 300 rowers and 120 marines. The triremes consisted of 170 rowers and 30 marines. It should be noted that, unless an emergency, neither Rome nor Carthage employed slaves to row their ships. The Carthaginians, with their long naval traditions, relied mainly on ramming, while the Romans created a boarding bridge known as the corvus, or crow, designed to nullify Carthaginian tactics. This was later abandoned. The battleships during this time were not able to stay at sea for very long. The hull of the ship was always very crowded, with limited food and water supply. This, along with the way ships were able to maneuver, made blocking a single port to a lengthy coastline not really possible. If they were able to blockade a port, enemy ships were usually able to break out, as we shall see. The origins of the war goes as far back as the year 279/8. Rome was engaged in a fierce war with Tarentum, and Tarentum had sent word to Greece, asking King Pyrrhus of Epirus for help. Pyrrhus accepted, and after engaging with Rome, Pyrrhus had scored 2 Pyrrhic victories against the Romans at Heraclea and Esculum. After these victories, Pyrrhus then received another request for help against the Carthaginians from other Greek communities in Sicily. This led to a treaty between Rome and Carthage. Polybius writes, "A third treaty again was made by Rome at the time of the invasion of Pyrrhus into Sicily, before the Carthaginians undertook the war for the possession of Sicily. This treaty contains the same provisions as the 2 earlier treaties, with these additional clauses. If they make a treaty of alliance with Pyrrhus, the Romans or Carthaginians shall make it on such terms as not to preclude the one giving aid to the other, if that one's territory is attacked. If one or the other stand in need of help, the Carthaginians shall supply the ships, whether for transport or war, but each people shall supply the pay for its own men employed on them. The Carthaginians shall also give aid by sea to the Romans if need be, but no one shall compel the crews to disembark against their will." The Carthaginians will end up never asking for help despite the defeats they suffered by Pyrrhus. There was an incident in which the Carthaginians sent Mago with 120 ships or 130 ships to aid the Romans. Mago then met a delegation of the Senate at Ostia in which the Romans expressed their thanks and rejected their offer of assistance. It was when Mago departed that he encountered and defeated Pyrrhus in a naval battle. However, when Pyrrhus landed in Italy and defeated the Romans in another Pyrrhic victory at Beneventum, unable to sustain his forces, he left for Greece. Tarentum was still in the hands of Milo, Pyrrhus' lieutenant. It is said that the Tarentines asked Carthage for help against Milo because they were angry at his continued presence. Milo then retreated to a nearby stronghold. The Romans, however, besieged Milo by land, and the Carthaginians accepted the Tarentines' call for aid and sent a fleet against Milo. This made the Romans upset. But what most likely happened was that Carthage came in accordance with the treaty to see if they could be of any service to the Romans, but the Romans were suspicious and rejected it because they never asked for help. They sent ambassadors to Carthage to complain, only for Carthage to deny the incident ever happening. This whole episode has been regarded by some scholars as unhistorical. However, there is no reason to deny it ever happening. The Carthaginians had good reasons to want to know what was going on in the war against Pyrrhus, and if Pyrrhus was going to return to Sicily. As Rome conquered southern Italy, their sphere of influence clashed with Carthage's. Once Rhegium was in control by the Romans, they were less than 10 miles from the shores of Sicily, a theater in which Carthage was active in. In 273, Rome founded 2 new colonies designed to protect the coast, Cosa and Paestum. The spark that set off the war was in 265 or 264, when Hiero of Syracuse defeated the Mamertines of Messana in battle. The Mamertines appealed to both Carthage and Rome for help. Carthage was able to convince Hiero not to attack Messana, perhaps by claiming Messana was an ally to Carthage. Nevertheless, Carthage installed a garrison in Messana, which made the Mamertines second-guess themselves, seeing that their independence was imperiled by a possible permanent Carthaginian garrison. Their appeal to Rome for help against Syracuse happened shortly after. Polybius writes, "The Romans were long in doubt. The inconsistency of sending such aid seemed manifest. A little while ago they had put some of their own citizens to death, with the extreme penalties of the law, for having broken faith with the people of Rhegium, and now so soon afterwards to assist the Mamertines, who had done precisely the same to the Mezzani, as well as Rhegium, involved the breach of equity very hard to justify. But while fully alive to these points, they yet saw the Carthaginian aggrandizement was not confined to Libya, but had embraced many districts in Iberia as well, and that Carthage was, besides, mistress of all the islands in the Sardinian and Tyrrhenian seas. They were beginning, therefore, to be exceedingly anxious lest, if the Carthaginians became masters of Sicily also, they should find them very dangerous and formidable neighbors, surrounding them as they would on every side, and occupying a position which commanded all the coast of Italy. In the end, the Senate agreed to send military aid to Messana, and appointed the consul Appius Claudius Caudex to the command, and was empowered by the Senate to make war on both Hiero and the Carthaginians if necessary. Appius made 2 attempts to negotiate with both nations, but after it failed, he immediately attacked them both. Now let's break this down. The Carthaginians had every right to take Messana as far as relations with Rome go. There was no treaty that prevented them from taking it, but Rome rightly saw this was a problem. Carthage now controlled one side of the Straits of Messana, and Rome the other. With less than 10 miles between them, Messana could be used as a staging ground for future conquests against them. But did Carthage show any signs of preparing a future war with Rome? It is hard to say because the evidence is so little. However, Carthage did prepare invasions before and after 264, like in 480 when Carthage invaded Sicily and its war against Syracuse in 408. Up until 264, Carthage's greatest enemy was Syracuse, and when comparing Carthage's military expeditions in the past and after 264, it is safe to assume that Carthage was not preparing war with Rome when Rome attacked Messana. The fact is that the more Italy became increasingly consolidated under Roman rule, the more Rome feared Carthage. In 264, the Roman Senate declared war on Carthage. However, neither side ever anticipated that the war would last a long 23 years, nor did the Romans ever think about driving the Carthaginians from Sicily until later. As soon as news of Rome's decision reached Messana, the Mamertines ejected their Punic garrison. Carthage responded by immediately sending a Carthaginian commander by the name of Hanno, son of Hannibal, who possessed a fleet as well as an army. Before Hanno arrived near Messana, he made an alliance with Agrigentum in southern Sicily and fortified the city, which commanded not only the main route along the southern coast of the island, but also important routes leading northwards towards Panormus and northeastwards to Enna and on to Catana. He then stationed his fleet near Cape Pelorius and based his troops at a place called Sines, which presumably was near Messana. The news of Rome's decision shocked both Carthage and Syracuse, and when the consul Appius Claudius reached Rhegium, he tried to negotiate with Carthage, who scolded him for his choice of allies. Syracuse and Carthage became allies, and when Appius tried to sail across the strait with auxiliary contingents from Italia towns, which consisted of triremes and pentaconters, as well as transport ships, he was pushed back and defeated by Hanno, who was patrolling the strait, whereby the Carthaginians remarked that they would not even allow the Romans to wash their hands in the sea. It should be noted that at this point in time, Rome did not have a navy. If they used ships, they relied on coastal allies to supply the ships. Once Appius was defeated, Hanno tried negotiating with Appius, trying to convince him against going to war. This could be the second negotiation that was mentioned earlier, that Appius tried to negotiate with both nations before attacking them. Appius then made a second attempt to reach Sicily, and this time he succeeded. Traveling by night, he brought presumably 2 legions with him. Hiero of Syracuse had stationed his army near the Chalcidian mountains, perhaps south of Messana, by the time Appius had landed. Now there are many different stories as to what happens next, to the point that even Polybius was confused. Appius engaged Hiero first, but the battle was indecisive. However, both sides claimed a victory. The Roman cavalry was defeated, but their heavy infantry prevailed. Hiero, suspicious of how easy it was for Rome to cross the strait when Carthage possessed such a powerful navy, and realizing what he was going up against, retreated back into Syracuse. Appius then engaged the Carthaginians, who were held up on a kind of peninsula where the sea was on one side and marshes on the other. Appius tried to engage them at the narrow neck of the peninsula, only to have to retreat, but the Carthaginians sallied forth and were driven back to their camp, suffering heavy losses. They then dispersed amongst various towns once the news of Hiero's defeat reached them. Now, it is said that Appius then turned his attention towards Syracuse and laid siege to the city. However, this is most likely not true, and had been confused with the later consul Valerius Messala. What most likely happened was that Appius was tempted by the retreat of Hiero to venture forth towards Syracuse, but made very little ground due to logistical issues. The next year saw Rome on the offensive. The new consuls of 263/2, Valerius Maximus, who adopted the name Messala, and Manius Atticilius Crassus, arrived in Sicily with a force of 40,000 troops. How he attained the name Messala is uncertain. The objective of liberating the Mamertines succeeded, but good old imperialism and the prospect of loot drove the Romans onward. When the consuls began campaigning, around 60 cities fell, or surrendered to Roman rule. Once these cities were secured, the Romans marched on Syracuse. Hiero, having seen what was happening, offered the consuls peace. And since the consuls were suffering from logistical issues like a lack of a stable food supply, they offered Hiero reasonable terms. Polybius writes, having made a treaty by which the king bound himself to give up his prisoners to the Romans without ransom, and in addition to this to pay them 100 talents, the Romans henceforth treated the Syracusans as allies and friends. For Carthage, Agrigentum became the principal base on Sicily, as most of their army was stationed there. It would seem at this point peace offers would have been considered, but it was at this time that Carthage was sending mercenaries such as Ligurian, Celtic, and mostly Spanish mercenaries to the island. They also sent a fleet to Sardinia, where they may have planned to attack the Romans along the coast of Italy. However, this didn't happen. Carthage therefore may have been using a strategy they had used in the past of waiting for their enemies to attack them in western Sicily. The new consuls for 262/1 were Lucius Postumius Megellus and Quintus Mamilius Vitellius, arrived and encamped 1 mile from Agrigentum with their forces. Agrigentum, along with Panormus, were of immense strategic importance, and was a staging ground for attacks on eastern Sicily. The consuls each took up a position south of Agrigentum and west of the city. The siege lasted for around 7 months. The commander of the Carthaginian forces, Hannibal, was sending a stream of messages to Carthage asking for help. Carthage responded by sending troops over from Africa, where they were taken under the general Hanno, which is probably the same Hanno from earlier. The exact details of his army is not known, but that it included about 50 elephants, Numidian cavalry, and mercenaries. Diodorus says that there were 50,000 infantry, 6,000 cavalry, and 60 elephants, but Diodorus is relying on Philinos, another primary source. However, Philinos is known for being wrong most of the time, so take these numbers with a grain of salt. Hanno moved from Lilybom to Heraclea Minoa, where he successfully captured the Roman supply base at Herbesos. Now that the Romans are starting to suffer from lack of supplies, aside from Hiero, Hanno moved on Agrigentum. What happens next is from Polybius. He writes, in the next place, Hanno, perceiving that the Romans were weakened by disease and privation, owing to an epidemic having broken out among them, and thinking that his own troops were in fit fighting condition, took with him all his elephants, about 50 in number, and all the rest of his force, and advanced rapidly from Heraclea. He had ordered the Numidian horse to precede him, and approaching the enemy's fortified camp to provoke him and attempt to draw his cavalry out, after which they were to give way and retire until they rejoined himself. The Numidians, acting on these orders, advanced up to one of the camps, and the Roman cavalry at once issued forth and boldly attacked them. The Libyans retreated as they had been ordered, until they joined Hanno's army, and then, Wheeling around and encircling the enemy, they attacked them, killing many and pursuing the rest as far as the camp. After this, Hanno encamped opposite the Romans, occupying the hill called Taurus, at a distance of about 10 stades, just over a mile, from the enemy. For 2 months they remained stationary, without any action more decisive than shooting at each other every day. But as Hannibal kept on announcing to Hanno by fire signals and messengers from the city that the population could not support the famine, and that deserters to the enemy were numerous owing to privation, the Carthaginian general decided to risk battle. The Romans, being no less eager for this owing to the reasons I stated above, both therefore led out their forces to the space between the camps, and engaged. The battle lasted for long, but at the end the Romans put to flight the advanced line of Carthaginian mercenaries, and as the latter fell back on the elephants, and the other divisions in their rear, the whole Phoenician army was thrown into disorder. A complete rout ensued, and most of them were put to the sword, some escaping to Heraclea. The Romans captured most of the elephants and all the baggage. Hanno retreated, and Hannibal escaped from Agrigentum in the night with some of his men. In the morning, the Romans took Agrigentum, sacking the city and selling its inhabitants, around 25,000, into slavery. The fall of Agrigentum solidified Rome's hold on eastern Sicily. It is now that they will begin to realize that in order to maintain their hold on Sicily, they would have to build a navy and contend with the greatest naval power of the period. As we shall see in Part 2, by decree of the Senate, the Romans will begin to wash their hands in the sea.